Hello, my name is Benoit Ladouceu. I will start by being Canadian once again and say that I'm sorry about my accent. Being French Canadian, sometimes my accent may be a little bit thick. I'm going to try to do my best to manage this. I'm currently managing the Bureau of Institutional Research at UQAM, which is a university in Montreal, Université du Québec à Montréal. I am not representing my university today, and as such, all opinions are entirely mine. Also, I'd like to point out that I will neither confirm nor deny that my university is involved on research on zombies. Now that the legal disclaimer is out of the way, I've also worked in other organizations that were mostly zombie-free, such as mining, rail, and the military. In the next 15 minutes or so, my goal is to broaden your knowledge about how to conduct proper risk reporting and risk monitoring during the zombie apocalypse, or maybe even before that, if needs be. A fair warning, this presentation might be tongue-in-cheek, slightly. My expertise on zombie is limited. I got my first mentor in risk management was another fan of zombie fiction. Thanks, Emily, for that. She also taught me about being a better risk communicator, which is one of the key elements to develop, I think, as a practitioner. So thank you, Emily, for that. Before going in deeper, I want to thank Alex Sidorenko for once again holding such a great event, gathering people from around the world, people that are much, much smarter than I am, and making sure that we all try together to influence the risk management community. So thanks, Alex, for all the hard work in there. And thanks for the other speakers. Now, if we go and Google risk and performance together, we got more than a billion hits, a billion and 100 million actually in Google. And I think that's just a hard cap that we're reaching. And at least a billion of them are probably white papers by the big fours. You can either read them all, and that's the only thing you'll do in your life, or you can just listen to this webinar, another webinar. I think most of those white papers would not stand the zombie apocalypse test. What's the zombie apocalypse test you're going to say? It's would the techniques be useful should the world go to hell, basically, during the apocalypse? So would you still be holding a risk register in case of the zombie apocalypse? Probably not. All that GRC stuff about checking bugs would probably not be that useful. So what's the value you're bringing around the table? Ask yourself this as a risk manager. If there's something bad happening, really bad, is what I'm doing still useful or not? Maybe last point before we dig in, why taking zombies as an example? Well, they're more interesting than widgets in my mind. The US Army have used them for planning. The Center for Disease Control have used them to do like preparedness awareness communication material. And also because risk management is often a dry subject, we deserve a lighter take on it sometime. But rest assured that everything that we're going to discuss here today is actually useful in a zombie-free world. It's actually more useful than 90% of the stuff that's out there. And yes, I just made that statistic up. Today's presentation will be gradual, so you can decide to drop out at any point in time where you feel, well, this is getting too technical. But I respect your intelligence, and I would like you to be like the proverbial frog in the pot of water. I don't want to boil your brain, but the idea is that as we're going to go gradually into this, maybe you're going to stick around longer than you'd expected, and you'll realize that quantitative risk assessment can bring a lot to your risk management practice. So it's split in 4 levels. The first level being heat maps. We will not be passing a lot of time on that. Then we're going to talk about slightly easier stuff that you can do through Excel and no statistics. So, and maybe you're going to talk in ranges. Let's say that I'd report how many people I can sustain in my colony. Well, I'm going to say between 5 and 45, for example. It's better than using a term like medium risk, but it's still not that good. As we use more statistical concepts, we're going to run monte-carlo simulation, and maybe we can say now that we have 90% chance of sustaining between 10 and 35 colonies. So this is more actionable intelligence, actually. And as we go further out still, we're going to talk about Bayesian inference a little bit. And that's going to give you things like updating my belief based on today's data. I've got 90% chance of sustaining between 12 and 37 fatalities, with potable water being the key factor. Obviously, any Monte Carlo simulation can give you information about the sensitivity. So what are the heaviest variables in your model? What is the most uncertain? So baby stuff, the zombie risk manager. So basically the risk register, which is weak, and we'll only pass one slide on that. For all the reason that I've been exposed by great people over the years, this is bad. Even good risk manager, though, might be stuck keeping these alive. I had to have a risk register because the auditor expected, because the boards expected, because management expected. So this is basically what Alexi is saying is risk management type 1. It's fairly useless. You still have to do some of it. Your goal is to minimize this so you can work on risk management 2, which is useful, but where not enough people are spending enough time. So you're not alone in that situation where you have a risk register. But once again, this is not giving value. And the issue is, what's the low risk of zombie apocalypse? I mean, come on, the apocalypse is fairly severe. So when is your low likelihood low enough so you're in a good space? And that's coming from Scott, which was one of my risk mentor. He was bang on that, saying where in that box is the acceptable level, because it's not everything low is not necessarily acceptable. I've worked in tons of organizations, or a few organizations, where for example, a very low likelihood was once every 30 years. Wait out. I mean, once every 30 years, I expect to live more than 30 years. So that means I could expect having the zombie apocalypse over my lifetime. It makes no sense. So this is very limited. And like Scott was saying, where do you slice that box to say that you're comfortable with your risk level? It's just not working. It's not really intuitive. So as a risk manager, let's do better. How can you truly prepare your organization for risk? For me, you have 3 jobs as a risk manager, 3 qualities that you can bring into an organization to make it better to deal with risk. The first one is you can make it robust. Take the pain. Build your zombie fence or your zombie wall. Be ready to take losses and replenish them. Robustness that can come from redundancy, your mindset, physical measures, designing defense in depth. There's a lot of things that robustness can help you with. It's not a solution to everything because there's a cost to robustness. It's expensive, and if you're dealing with the wrong threat, you're spending resources that could be used in a better way in your business or your organization. The second thing you can do is resilience. How you build a resilient organization. It's all about adaptability, agility, the capacity to adapt. The picture that you have here is a self-organizing flock of birds, which can react nearly instantly to obstacles and threats. It's a little bit the idea of resilience. It's hard to graphically portray resilience, but it's your ability to rebound and take opportunities, seize them when you see them. So it's not always easy to bring to an organization, especially in some business. I mean, in mining, building resilience is fairly hard if you're only working on one commodity. If you're having multiple commodities, multiple products, well, you're more resilient because hopefully if one tanks, maybe another one is doing good. So we'll see in the next few months if there's a recession, who is resilient and who's not. But to support both robustness and resilience, those are inherent characteristics. Maybe robustness is a little bit more involved. It's a little bit, you need to be more specific to a threat, while resilience, you can try to be resilient as an organization. But to support both of them, what's really important, and that's still part of the risk manager's job, is to be warned or forewarned. That's because you rarely control the full budget of the organization. You need to influence people with what you see are the threats, and you need to be spot on. If not, you're going to have a problem. And you can't always be Dr. Doom and Gloom as a risk manager. If you're saying everything's a red, well, you shouldn't be talking about red risk, but if everything's a critical risk, no, you're there to help people understand, difference the signal from the noise. There's a lot of noise around and you need to find the signal. I'm going to give you an example from COVID, not really original. I was the risk manager for VRL Canada at that point, rail company. And in January 2020, we did activate our emergency cell and started getting some PPE. So in January, before everything started to flare up, we actually decided, okay, there's something happened. How did we do this? We applied without knowing it or without defining it as so, Bayesian reasoning. We took data, and the more data we had, we changed our stance, our posture. So we received an alert from a CDC mailing list. First thing, oh, okay, there's something, but you receive those alerts all the time. So, and at first it was not large numbers that were being reported, but China, great country, not always the most transparent. So you can say, well, okay, maybe not all the numbers are known yet. Okay, so let's be a little bit more wary. So you adjust, and then you get an inkling that it's respiratory. Okay, so maybe, okay, well, that could spread fast. Remember SARS? It did create quite a scare. So more adjustment. And then there's some cases in other country, and then at that point, it's out. That for sure is going to hit us. So this is where we started evaluating costs of buying supplies and things like that and being prepared. So this is about being warned. You need to take a look at what are the signals out there and it's difficult. You need to evaluate which are which signals could impact your organization. Another thing, it's consider if your threat is intentional. You got to be careful about intention, because early warning signs of landslides, for example, they're not deceptive. If you see those crack and those deformation in the ground, well, okay, there's going to be a landslide here. The mass of earth and rock is not trying to deceive you. Deception is another challenge. And during the zombie apocalypse, what we know, our corpus of knowledge about zombies, say that they're more like a force of nature. They're not trying to deceive you. But yes, they're basically a big, relentless, rather dumb force of nature, but that's it. It's easy to plan for. The survivors would be another issue, for example. So if you want to be warned, you got to be careful, because your signals and what you get from the environment, if there's deception involved, someone could try to bypass your defense. Like, the survivors would be crafty, they can plan, they can adjust your countermeasure. So you got to keep that in mind when you're going about finding your signal. And this is really back to the signal and the noise. What do we observe here is a mix of signal and noise. And you need to separate this to see what's isolating the signal from all that noise. You need to take a look at the trend. Same thing goes when you talk about the KPI. There's some natural fluctuations in there, and there's different ways you can apply to detect, is this something real? Is just normal fluctuations in my indicator, for example? And all this may sound like we're not into the statistical application here. We're just about thinking about that noise and that signal that we can see and try to react to. And people could say, well, that's not really scientific as an approach. Well, it's still better than what a lot of people are doing, just saying, oh, I've got a medium likelihood of this happening. Remember from Doug Hubbard, the Ixus Pero Ursus fallacy, which says that you don't have to be perfect in your approach. You just need to beat the other alternative. You need to beat the worst model, and then you can improve on that. So some of the signals you're going to be fairly weak, and you can't track. You got different approach. Are you tracking specific elements, specific indicators, or are you just keeping a broad approach or a mix of it? If I'm using a broad approach, you're going to read a little bit on everything as a risk manager, and you're going to try to figure out if there's something that's out of the ordinary, and then investigate it a little more. And there's some things like the interest rates, and some things like the proportion of people that are out of jobs, or things like that are things you should track anyway, and maybe you can formalize it. So you need that combination when you're doing what we call VG, when you're tracking indicators out there, when you're doing an environment scan. You need to have a formal one for specific things that relate to your organization, but keep your mind open to consider a lot of things. Further complicating that whole thing about signal and noise is that a lot of issues, things like the zombie apocalypse, are probably wicked problems. So what's a wicked problem? It's basically something where you don't have a clear solution. You've got multiple stakeholders, multiple objectives, which could be impacting each other. It's a complex system where you don't know all the interaction, where they're going to lead. Once again, if you think of the world in the format of a risk register, which is columns and lines, you will not be able to map out everything that's out there, because guess what? The risks are networks, and things will cascade down, and things will amplify, and it's hard to track. And the more issues or topics or data point you have, the way they interact between each other, like you see on the diagram here, it's getting more complex and more complicated. So let's get back to the zombie apocalypse. You've got multiple objectives. You need water, you need food, you need sanitation. Well, water availability is a big problem, or pure or potable water is a big problem. Like if you take the show The Fear of the Walking Dead, in my mind, there's way too many people dying of zombies or killed by people. A lot more people should die of fever, cholera, minor infections, and things like that, because those are basic needs or basic risk, where if you don't have what you need to do the purification, for example, it's going to lead to fatality. So it's a complex problem. It's a wicked problem, because you need all that stuff to live. But the more you go outside to find chlorine or things like that to do your things, every scavenger hunt, it increases the risk of fighting zombies or finding survivors that might be good or bad. So you increase some risk, you mitigate some risk, and it's a balance of things. And that's a system thinking more than having a standard risk register. So more risk, more potential interactions between risks, it quickly adds up and it creates a wicked problem for your organization because how can you solve it? So let's talk about risk and trend a little bit because we're talking about finding signals and things like that. And the one of the things is when you're communicating key risk indicator, I know not everyone likes them. I kind of like them, but it's basically a KPI. And when you're communicating a KPI, very important when you're doing your reporting because once again you need to report, you need to influence because you're a risk manager. You're not necessarily you're not the CEO or the dictator or whatever's got full control on the budget. So cut the jargon. Take the time to explain the principles. I'm going to give you an example. Let's take a look at the following formula. What is that? Well, okay, probably Graham Heath, that's also presenting this year and past few years, will have figured it out like in half a second because he's way better with math than I am. But that's basically for more the regular folks like me. This is basically the formula for a moving average. That's fairly simple. That if you show that to an exec, well, no, that's not gonna go well. It's not the perfect way to track a KPI, but it's a great way to silence the noise and see the trend. So basically, instead of gazing at that marvelous formula, let's take a look at this. So basically, this is Excel. I've got daily data. I've put the formula here. So that's the formula for my rolling average. So basically what I have is average of, it's on top here because I've hidden some rows, but average from A2 to A12, and then average from A3 to A13. So as I click and drag this is basically my moving average over time. And so in orange here, I've got my actual values, but here in green, I've got my moving average smoothed out. And being smoothed out, it's going to reduce some of that fluctuation, especially if things fluctuate quickly, and it's going to give me a clearer indication of the trend. So that's one of the examples that you can do, but just do it the simple way. Don't and explain it the simple way. No need to call your simulation a light and hypercube. Yes, most statistical package today are using light and hypercube because it's faster to converge and give you results. Fine, but everyone's calling it the Monte Carlo simulation. It's probably good enough for your board. So cut the jargon. Go with plain English or French or Swahili or whichever is your language. Replace PAD value with percentage. Like my favorite chief risk officer of all time, Jean-François Legault from VRL, was a lawyer by trade. He still is a lawyer by trade, probably one of the most literary profession. And yet he got Monte Carlo simulation. Don't underestimate the capacity of people to understand assumption and things like that. Just communicate it better. And let's say everyone can understand we have 95% likelihood that the number of zombies that will assault our position is between, let's say, 30 and 60, for example. People can get that. And also be transparent and honest and humble about your uncertainty. If you're not sure, state it. As a risk manager, you don't have the comfort of talking about certainties. Your life at least is absolutely not about neat linear equation. So that's something to keep in mind. So talk in range, present assumption, cut the jargon. That's a good way of communicating things. Let's take a quick look now at another way, and we're walking dead territory. It's a little more complicated, but how do you communicate if an indicator is moving the right way or not? So we'll be quick on that one. Pick up the right visualization and to talk about risk. Obviously, there's some visualizations which are big no pie charts. Pie charts are basically the zombies of charts. It's the same thing than using a heat map, for example. So don't go with those types of tool, but pick the right things. Like a process behavior chart is a very useful way to illustrate if variability is an issue for any performance indicator. And I'm just going to show it quickly, and we're going to run it through code in a second, but I just want you to see the chart. Basically, what you have is values. In this case, as part of the group, it could be over time, for example, that's as part of a group. So you pick your values and you're setting a high limit and a low limit, and you see when you're hitting those limits. So let's take a look at code in R a little more to see how it all works out. Please don't run. I know this may look intimidating. This is R, a statistical programming software that can be used for analytics, machine learning, Monte Carlo simulations. I love R. It's one of my main work tool, but you don't need to learn R to do most of what we're going to be seeing today. There's other solutions, commercial solutions, which may look better, which are easier maybe to learn, but sometimes they're expensive. They always have some limitations. So I think it's worth it for a risk manager to learn R or Python, your choice. But basically, it's a good time investment. So let's take a quick look at this is the RStudio interface. So here in this window, I've got the code. So by code, this command I'm going to run and ask the computer to execute. Here, the code will be ran, and this is where I'm going to get any error messages I could get. Here in this portion, I'm going to get the environment. So I'm going to get all the data sets, the variables that are being created. And here we'll use this pane for visualization of any plots we're going to do. So first thing I'm going to do, anything in R with a hashtag means it's a node, so it's not being actually executed. I'm going to load some packages. So those are pre-developed bits of code that sometimes a lot of code actually that run operation for us. So you don't need to code everything every time. And the first thing we're going to take a look at is the mighty process behavior chart. So I'm going to take data that's within one of the packages. So I'm not using zombie data on this one, but once again, for your zombie needs, any data set can be used. So I'm going to load data here, which is parameters for piston rings. So basically, I'm going to take a quick look at what that data does look like. And so those are different samples. This is the diameter of the actual piston rings. And what I'm just going to quickly transform the data so it can be used by the QCC package to produce what I need. And here I have, let's see, those are my various samples that I got with the parameters. And I'm going to do summary, after which I'm going to see for every one of those samples, what are the actual parameters, minimal value, my quartiles, my median, my mean, my max. So I'm having an overview because basically those are small distributions. Now that I'm done with that, I'm going to plot it. So there's a really, really, well, okay, I'm a nerd, so I'll say it's a cool option, a cool function. I'm going to run my process chart right away. So what I have here, let's take a look at the code. I'm basically saying, please take those 25 first data points. Then I would like you to create that graph. And I'm putting my boundaries for what's acceptable very wide at 4 sigmas here. So this is something that's very, very wide. So if I'm taking a quick look here, I'm seeing that all my data points are between my upper limit and my lower limit. So I'd be in control, but I'm not really asking a lot of myself by setting this. So maybe I'm going to diminish it to 2, for example. So I'm going to be narrower, getting back to this here. What you'll see is I've got 2 points now that are outside of my boundary. So high and low. And I could adjust as I get more data, or as my process is becoming more stable, I could go even more stringent. So I'm going for only 1 standard deviation tolerance on both sides. And up here, I see I've got multiple points that are outside. Once again, if you're in your process, you should have actions related to if you break the boundaries. So you may say that anytime you're going above or under, you want to conduct an investigation or a review of the parameter, or you need to have an action following an out of boundary event or incident, for example. So here, for me, this is a very powerful management tool because you can adjust. And obviously here we're having symmetrical boundaries. You could have asymmetrical boundaries, for example. That's going to tell you when you're out of control. When is something out of the ordinary? When is something maybe becoming a signal and should warrant some more attention? So any KPI you have in your business, you could do this. And back to my zombie perimeter fence example, well, why would I say that having too few zombies passing the perimeter fence might be an issue? Well, let's think about it. Most organizations, they don't think about excess control. And there's such a thing as having too much controls. And maybe that because I have a layered defense with multiple lines of defense, and I know that after the fence, there's other stuff that's going to get the zombies. Well, maybe that if the fence is not letting passing enough zombies. Maybe it's because it's too strong, so maybe I've wasted resources. I know for zombies, it's maybe not the best example, but think about it in your business. Maybe you're putting too much effort and control on risks that are not worth it, and maybe you could be more lenient and more accepting of events that are going low or high. So obviously every KPI will need to have its own appetite. And for me, this is a real application of risk appetite instead of some of the very complicated statements sometimes you have. Well, no, this is on a measurable metric. You're going to have your tolerance, your appetite. And maybe overall, it's not only getting a point out. Maybe you're going to say, if I'm getting only 1 point out per year, I can live with that. So this is very personal for an organization defining their the boundaries over those key performance indicators. Well, that was fun. But now let's take a look at how can we use Monte Carlo simulation to help us set objective level for indicators. So let's consider we have an objective. Let's say it's the number of zombies we kill per year. You could be boring and take another measure like sales, but I'm taking zombies. And let's consider these zombies as a continuous variable because, hey, you can cut them into smaller pieces and they're still going to wiggle and try to get to you. So let's say that well, I wonder what would be the smallest discrete zombie unit. Is it cell level? Is it a virus in there? So, but let's treat it as a continuous variable anyway, a little bit like cache or height or distance or things like that. How do you set your target for zombie kills? So different ways of going about it. So maybe you pick an aspirational number. We will kill all the zombies of the world. Or maybe you pick something slightly bigger than last year. We've killed 2 last year. Let's kill 3 this year. Or maybe you ask your board. Don't ask your board about setting your objectives. Suggest the objectives and then go with try to have them prove it. Also, I don't think that boards will disappear during the zombie apocalypse. They're probably too feisty for that. So there must be a better way to set a target number, and that's something I've used actually in Rails. So in a more serious environment, how can you use Monte Carlo simulation? We were using distribution fit and then trends and things like that. But let's take a look at a simple way. It's all about decomposition, and yes, that's pun intended. Strongly intended even. So you decompose your target into contributors. So let's take a look at this. I'm going to run the full code, so let's not worry too much about the code. So basically, I'm creating a distribution of the number of zombies I've trapped, that I got killed by trap, killed by patrols, and killed by my perimeter defense. And I'm going to create histograms for each one of those. So I'll show you in the code in a second, but basically it's giving me 3 histograms. I've got those 3 based on the 3 means of killing zombies. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add them up. So I'm taking those 3 distributions, trap, patrol, and perimeter, I'm adding them up, creating a new distribution. So basically, this is my expected number of kill per zombies. And at any point here, I can put a line saying that's a p-value or percentage value of killing at least that many zombies or more than that number of zombies. So this is the output of my Monte Carlo simulation. Once this is done, if I'm running, and once again, that's our code, but if I'm running quantiles, I'm going to get the various p-values or percentage of this. And this is where it's getting interesting, because maybe I'm saying that I want to have 50% chance of meeting my objective. Like that's kind of ambitious, but I want to have stretch target. And maybe I'm saying if you want to be even better, I'm going to ask you a value of 75%. So you have 25% chance of hitting that target or more. And maybe 90% will be what I say for you're doing absolutely great. You can have the biggest bonus of all time. You're exceeding every expectation. So this is where I can use my likelihood of hitting a specific target and say, this is your target for this year. And then people can work toward this. So when I'm communicating to the board, do you think I'm going to show them the code and the histograms and the thought process? No, I'm going to suggest this. And maybe I've got a slide down in the annex I can bring up, but I'm just going to show you here. We propose the objective 1.1 for the corporation this year, for the post-apocalyptic hideout, is zombie kills for base alpha in number of zombies. Our objective is 102 zombies killed this year, so we got 50% chance. We could go lower, we could go higher, depends on how much you want to have stretch targets. Here's my surpass objective, 180 zombies. And here's my exceed, and you get the biggest bonus of all time, and here you are. So basically, I just set objective using Monte Carlo simulation in R, and you would have used actual historical data for that, and you can adjust for trends or things like that. So this is the type of thing that gives some more thought, especially for, don't do this for all your objectives, but maybe for very critical objective might be useful to do so. Now we'll run a Monte Carlo simulation in order to assess if my objectives are set the right way. And this is back to the example we're seeing on the slide. I just want to show you the code quickly so you understand how it works at the back. So remember that I had 3 things that can kill zombies: my trap, my patrol, and my parameter. And now what I'm saying is I'm going to give me a log normal distribution. So that's the function here. I want 10,000 iterations, so 10,000 values taken out of that. And here are the parameters for my log normal distribution. I'm using log normal distribution here because I think not enough people are using them in Monte Carlo simulation. A lot of phenomena are really well explained by a log normal distribution, while a lot of the statistical package are using those triangular distribution. They can work, but once again, you're limited by imagination because you're putting a hard cap at the bottom, but also a hard cap at the top. You're limiting your distribution. It's bounded. And the log normal distribution on the right is not bounded. So you can go for a very low likelihood of extreme events. So I'd rather use log normal for a lot of things. Once again, every problem, use the tool you have, and even using a triangular distribution might not be best practice. It's still way better than using a heat map. So what I'm going to do here, I'm going to create my distribution for trap, patrol, perimeter, and let's just take a look at the summary for trap, for example. So you see the distribution have been created. And for the summary for trap here, well, minimum value of zombie killed is 0.071, so that's the hand or something like that. I've got my quartile, my median, my mean. So I've got the distribution of how many zombies are killed by the trap if I'm taking a look at the distribution. What I'll do is I'm going to create some histograms here. So you see, those are the 3 histograms that were shown in the slide. I'm going to add the 3 distribution together to get the number of kills. So now I'm going to have how many kills I have through all my lines of defense. So I've created the distribution kill because it's going to add the first value of each distribution together, create kill 1. First value of each second value of each distribution are added. That's going to give me value of kills 2. So this is what I get here. And let's take a closer look at, here we are. Here's my full distribution of expected kills based on, once again, the assumption that those kills are independent, and I can get my quantile out. So this was shown in this slide, but I'd rather have you see the code a little bit to see how it works, because you see it's only a few lines of code and you already have a better appreciation of what's to be expected and maybe where to set your objective, your performance. Next, we're still going to stay in the Walking Dead zone, but let's talk about how you review the performance of your risk management program. It's all fine and dandy. You have a risk management process in place, but is it useful? And it's a good question to ask yourself. So how do you measure performance for something like this? Because one of the issues with, for example, planning in administration is the planner is rarely getting evaluated. Same goes for the risk manager. When was the last time that someone took a look at your risk register and say, that's not right, that's not a good portrait of our reality? So once again, as a risk manager, do you pass the zombie apocalypse test? Would your job be maintained following the apocalypse? So how you can measure is maybe measure the number of risk in your risk register. And that's supposed to be a joke. So maybe you can ask variation from the budget to the risk. How close were you to your risk-adjusted budget? Because for me, you should have a risk-adjusted budget. You should have a base budget, but it includes uncertainty. Accountants hate that. They're probably going to be putting a price on my head, but you don't want to have a deterministic budget. We much rather have uncertainty in there so you understand what's your likelihood of actually hitting your target, because you will not spend precisely $102,131.55 on a specific item unless it's contractually bounded. You can have variability on a lot of costs. You can have a variability on the revenues as well. So risk-adjusted budget, you could take that as a basis to see if you're doing a good job. Another way is risk materialization. Do risk events really happen? If I have a risk register or a list of risk or risk inside a model, and I have 10 of them, and each have a 50% likelihood of happening each year. Well, a quick beta distribution calculation will tell you that you have 99.9% chance of having at least one of those 10 risks materialize. And you've got nearly 90% chance of having between 3 and 7 risk materializing out of those 10 if they have a 50% likelihood chance each and they're independent. So how many organizations actually take a look at the risk they have in their models and or their register and ask how many of them actually materialize? We did it in Rail, but only for some very specific risk, like significant risk. So just something to keep in mind. Another thing you can do is tracking your project portfolio performance. If you provision your project at P80, for example, well, guess what? Only one project out of 5 should go above budget. You can also do this the other way and take a look at, are people over provisioning and padding and putting too much money in there. Now let's quickly talk about forecasting. It's more advanced than the signal and noise stuff we're talking about earlier, and most non-financial risk management programs are not interested into time series. Time series is basically the evolution of a parameter or a variable over time. And that variable could be sales, it could be the number of zombies showing up at your door, it could be your tomato production in your greenhouse, how many sick people there are around, whatever. But as always, there's noise and there's the valuable signal. And you can do some analytics backward looking to gain knowledge to access, for example, a better understanding of is it smooth or are there specific events that we should investigate and try to understand. So basically, one of the way to do that, and I'm going to show you with code in a second, but one of the way you can do that is using seasonal and trend decomposition using loss. So basically, we'll take a look at time series and decomposition of time series. So what I'll start to do is I'll import some data from the FPP3 package. So it's US finance employment data that was available. It could be anything really. So what I'll do is I'll import this and let's take a look at what that code will do. So first thing is I'm taking the base data set, after which I'm piping in a filter because I just want to keep some years in my data set. I don't need the whole thing. And I'm going to do a second filter on a second variable, which will be on the title. So I want financial activities, basically. That's just one example. It could be any other sector from that data set. And I'll remove series ID because I actually don't need it. So here we are. I've got my months and my years. It's all financial activities, and I've got a number of people that were employed in that sector for that given month. This is my start. Let's take a look at the trend. So I'm running autoplot, still from the same package. And what I'm getting here is the full plot. And we see it looks like there's some seasonality. That's going to be interesting. And obviously, there's some big events here with the financial crisis. Obviously, it was not the best time to be working in a banking sector. So we see the progress over time of our indicator. This is a number of people employed. Once again, it could be just any indicator you have in your company, which could evolve over time. Because once again, time is often one of the things risk managers don't think that much about. Now what I'll do is I will model and I will be using a decomposition to take a look at how does this value evolve over time. So here we are. This is just giving me basically the evolution and it's breaking down my time series into components, which we'll visualize in a second. So those are the numbers. It's easier to autoplot it. So once again, I'm taking component, which are the bits from my model, and I'm gonna autoplot it to take a closer look. And here we are. I'm gonna spread this up a little bit. So I've got my raw data, which is here. So we see the evolution over time. I've got here the trend. So this is important because it's taking out the trend out of all the noise in the data. So we see that there's overall a rising trend. There's some period of time where that did change, and it's normal. It's a cyclical industry, for example. In the case of banking, when the economy is tanking, obviously, there could be some reduction in jobs. So we see the trend, which is interesting for a risk manager because you want to point out where things are going. Then I've got the seasonality extracted, and it changed over time. But there's some patterns in the data that can be seen. And maybe of really great interest for a risk manager is here. That's the reminder. That's what is neither explained by the trend nor by the seasonality. So those are events. They could be risk materializing, for example, in the past, because once again, we're only taking a look at past data here, but we could see how things did evolve over time, and we can try to explain why those big changes that are not part of the seasonality or the trend, and this can help us think about what could be future risk materializing. You can also project yourself in the future and do so for some forecasting. So once again, we're going to run the code, but the forecasting bit here, basically, if I'm taking a quick look, I've got the historical data. I've got the forecast bit here, and that was done just using 2 lines of code. First line is basically creating a model. Second line is basically running for the forecast and then adding the plot. And once again, here, those little signs here, it's amazing. Pipe operator, you can now take those steps and reduce the amount of code you do by a lot. So the example here is an autoregressive model in Narima, but let's take a look at how it plans out using R. You're a bunch of wise people, so maybe you picked up that I've kind of cheated for the second part here. I've already had the model 1 here, which is ran using this code here. So that's another model. It's not the same. We're not doing a STL model, but this is an ARIMA, so an autoregressive model. And basically, I just ran it before, since it's taking about 1.5 minutes to run, so that would be a waste of time. So I just executed the same code of taking the same data I had before, and then I've run the model. And the reason why it took a little bit more time is, one, first, I'm then having a very powerful laptop here. Two, I've run stepwise with false and approximation with false. So basically, I'm going for the real deal. I'm running the model to get the real values. It takes a little more time, bit more oomph. So that's why I ran it. So back to the ARIMA. Basically, it's all nice to see the seasonality and understand it, and it's great for your insights. But sometimes you really want to project in the future and see where things are going. So what I'll do is I will take the model 1 that was run using the code here, which is hidden, and I will execute it, telling it, take what you have as data and add 48 time periods after here. So my time period for that data set is a monthly basis for that time series. So I'm going to say add 4 years of prediction after what we already have. So obviously, the more data and the more stable it is, you would have a better forecast because there's less variation. Now, we know that there's some noise, there's some events that are disruptor in that case. So we won't have that much precision, but at least it still gives us a guideline of what the future might look like. So enough talking, let's run the code. Here we are. I have here all the historical data that you can see, but after my last data point, now I have what's seen in the future. So what's seen in the future is it's going to give you a prediction, which is the blue line here. What's more, it's going to give you ranges of confidence, boundaries of your confidence interval plotted as well. So anything in dark blue is part of a P80. So there's 80% likelihood based on past data that your data points will fall, your future data points will fall between those boundaries. And in light blue, you got the P95. So you got 95% chance that it's going to be in there. What's interesting is it starts really precise. So up to maybe a year in the future, it's not too bad. But the further out in time you go, obviously, the bigger your gap becomes. So that's one of the things that's useful because that's basically risk. If you take any indicator, you can evaluate what is your risk of being within certain parameters. Next level, interesting stuff, Bayesian updating. So basically, I've talked about that in the past. Knowledge is imperfect. Our knowledge of the situation is imperfect. And how do you create a distribution around a table? In the past, I've covered different ways to solicit expert opinion, how to fit the distribution on data. Those are the two big options. But sometimes you want to do both. You might start with a prior understanding of a phenomenon, but then you want to integrate data. And Bayes' theorem is a formula about conditional probabilities that was further developed to build a full suite of statistical tools. But at the base, it's about updating your belief based on new information. You start with prior information, then you get new data in, and then you have a posterior understanding, a better understanding of your data. So as shown on previous raw presentations, the Bayesian paradigm, it gives a lot of advantages to the risk manager because you gradually refine your knowledge about reality. You have a better grasp on uncertainty within your model and how it evolves over time. And you can conduct statistical testing through it as well. In a probabilistic fashion, you drop the concept of null hypothesis because when you're explaining results to an executive, it's easier to talk about Bayesian results with odds, for example, because people maybe play cards or bet or things like that. So it's easier to understand than to talk about rejecting and null hypothesis. It's not as intuitive. So Bayesian updating is one of the key components of this whole paradigm. Basically, you're taking your distribution and you're updating it with new knowledge. And there's shortcuts for that. Conjugate priors. Some distribution work really well together, like the beta binomial conjugate prior. We used that last year to kill James Bond or try to kill James Bond. You start with an assumption and then you refine it as you get more data in. But there's different ways of there's different ways. It's about incrementalism. You bring more data and you're getting a better understanding. Today, what we'll apply it to is the number of zombies getting at your gate per hour. Maybe your gate can resist, I don't know, 50 zombies. But once again, you can apply this to zombies, but if you're in a zombie shortage, which is kind of a shame, you could apply this to Mikhail issue in your plant or repair capacity. The number of customer calls that you get and your capacity to take care of them is also an example that's used a lot. It's good if there's no specific pattern, but you have a random number of people or event happening in a given period of time. Let's take a look at a little bit about how it works. Now, toward exciting stuff, let's take a look at Bayesian updating. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to create a vector that's just going to be used in my functions throughout for the graphs and everything. And I'm going to ask myself, well, there's fast and slow zombies. And what's the proportion of fast zombie versus slow zombies? If you're not that much into zombies, you could take any success or failure event or any binary outcome. It could be coin toss. It could be if someone's going to be happy or not. Anything that you see initially, if I'm just picking one value, if I just have one observation, well, anything can go. As I get more observation, I'm going to reduce my uncertainty because I'm going to have a better knowledge of what I'm looking at. So let's say that is the start of the zombie apocalypse. It's just started. People are screaming everywhere. No one knows for sure what happens. Some people are maybe in their bunkers already, but most of the people are just trying to figure things out. What I'll do is I'm going to plot a beta distribution because right now what I'm trying to do is a beta binomial conjugate prior. Let's not get too bogged down in detail, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna gradually update the beta distribution. You may recall this from past risk awareness week video I gave. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna say I'm seeing 3 fast zombies and 8 slow zombies. It's a week prior. It's not a lot of cases to base ourselves on, but I'm gonna run that code, and here we are. This is the beta distribution. So basically, it states that my proportion of fast zombies will be covered in this distribution. So I expect about maybe 25% of fast zombies based on that 3 and 8 ratio, but it could be much wider. It can't be 0. That's why it starts here. It just can't be 0 because I've already seen fast zombies, but maybe I was really, really lucky and I did not encounter that many fast zombies. So maybe there's up to 60% or 80% of fast. It's unlikely, but it's still a possibility. So what I need to do is the more data I'm going to get a narrower spread of this. I'm going to have a clearer picture of course, if I see 1,000 zombies and there's still only 3 fast zombies, well, I've got a clear picture of the number of zombies. So this is the power of that distribution. And it could be done for inspections, for example, inspection of something, condition A is found in that many percent of cases. So from my plot, like numbers, so I'm going to run here Q beta, so quantile beta. So I'm going to ask, I want to know that they're going to need 90% interval of for that parameter. So basically I'm saying, if I'm running this, I've got between 9% and 51% of fast zombies based on that 3 and 8 ratio. Now let's say I keep observing, I survived the initial stage and I've seen more zombies, a little over 100 zombies. So I'm going to do the exact same procedure. I've got 14 fast zombie for 96 slow zombies. I'm gonna run this here. So what we see right away is much narrower spread, and oh, it shifted down. So maybe I saw more fast zombies at it started. I don't know if Darwinism is applicable to zombies, if fast zombies are gonna propagate more or not. I don't know that, but basically what I have is a more confidence. It's a narrower spread, which we're gonna take a look because my 90% confidence interval on the proportion of fast zombie is now between 8% and 18%. So much more precise, which is good. And if I have 100 more observation, it's going to get even more precise. So that's very powerful in my mind. And here's a nifty function that's going to show you everything together in just one go. So that's basically my prior. That's my full data afterward. And here we are calculated. So my prior was that curve in yellow. Now I'm going to have the likelihood. So the new data is in blue. And my posterior, which is adjusting the prior data based on further evidence, is in green. So basically what it states is that it shifted down by a lot. And the more data you have, the more precise going to be that posterior distribution, which you can then use in your Monte Carlo simulations, for example. Or you could run statistical testing to see, is there a significant change over time between my ratio of fast and slow zombies? And should I worry about them? And should I get better running shoes, for example? So once again, all of this is very useful for practitioner. It may sound arcane, but it's not. You can apply this in model. Just don't tell your board you're doing that. Just keep it hidden in the back of the model, document it properly, and when you communicate that, you're going to be you're going to keep your job. Don't start talking about prior and posterior to a board unless you're working at the university or something like that. Not everything is binary. There's a lot of things that can take multiple values. For example, the number of zombies per hour that are showing up at my front door. So it could be also sales if you're into boring stuff. But about the zombies, it's sometime you got a independent event that's going to happen. It's maybe attack and maybe people getting lost. You want to model those as well. Not everything's binary. So what we'll do is, let's say that I want to take some prior knowledge that I have about my zombie attack rate at my gate, for example, and I want to update it as I get more data. Not binary, so I'm going to use a different conjugate prior in this case. I'm going to use, I'm going to go with the gamma Poisson conjugate rate. So basically, I'm going to start with a gamma distribution, which is a little bit like the distribution we're taking a look at with the beta, because it's going to give me the spread of the potential value of a certain parameter. In our case, we're interested in lambda. Lambda is the sole parameter you're using for a Poisson distribution. So lambda is going to define your Poisson distribution, but initially you won't have necessarily that much faith on where that lambda is. It's a little bit like you when you're setting your alpha and your beta in the beta distribution, your value, your mean value in your distribution and your beta distribution, it's spread. So initially, let's say I've got an average. I talk with the gate guard and he says, I've got 6 zombies per hour on average. I'm not counting them, but this is what I think. And there's at least some zombies every hour. So it's not, there's always zombies. There's no comps time. And it's very rare that we get 12 or more. So this is vague. This is what the type of thing that an expert might give you on the table. And the expert, yes, might be like PhD something, can be your mechanic working on saying, yeah, we got that type of situation happening about once every month. So lambda is basically the average frequency of an incident over a period of time. That's what lambda is. So we could sit with him and take a look at the few distribution, and I'm going to put all this down here so we see here the graph better. And I'm going to run a few beta distribution, and you go by trial and error, and you say, well, no, that's definitely not it because my mean here is absolutely not 2.5. So that's not a good representation. And I'm going to pass through a few of them, trying to figure out what is a good distribution. And once again, that's an intuitive process because we don't have like hard data. It's not like I have a full database of the number of zombies. I'm talking with someone. So at least I'm going to get a starting point to set my distribution. I'm going to keep running those, and I'm still too low, and I'm still too low. And well, as we see, I've run that before. So here I'm saying, yeah, it's about 6 zombies on the average. It should be about that. Yes, there's zombies almost all the time. And yes, it's rare that I have 12 or more. So that's a starting point. It won't necessarily be perfect, but it's a good starting point. I'm going to summarize it. I'm going to take a look at, yeah, okay, the mean is 6. So maybe 6 for a lambda for a starting point might work for what I'm trying to do. And I'm going to have mode, standard deviation, all that good stuff. So this gives me a starting point. And the function plot Poisson likelihood here, I'm going to add new observation on that because now maybe I'm saying gate guard, please keep a register to track the number of zombies that are getting in or are getting at the gate. And it's probably going to be more useful than most risk register having that log of zombies shuffling in. So maybe the first day I've got 3, the second I've got 4, 12, 2, 5. So that's more data points. So I'm going to plot this as well with the plot Poisson likelihood. Here we are. So that's going to give me a spread for the value of lambda. It's already fairly narrow. If I'd have more variability, it'd be bigger, but those numbers were all nearly close by. So this gives me where should my lambda fall? And yeah, it's about at 6. So that's a good start. And once again, I'm going to put everything together. So I'm going to start with my previous gamma distribution, and I'm going to add, here we are, I'm going to add how many events here I had over how many days, basically. In that case, it could be months and could be weeks. So I'm running the same type of thing I've run with the beta binomial conjugate prior. And here I had my prior understanding of where my lambda could be based on what my gate guard said. And then I'm going to have in blue what the data says, and I'm going to have in green my posterior, which once again, I could feed in my Monte Carlo simulation. Could be applied to just about any parameter you're tracking in your organization, especially when you're starting something new. You're going to get your subject matter experts, and then you're going to adjust based on data. And this is one of the power of Bayesian, the application of Bayes theorem is you will decrease your uncertainty as you get more data, but you start from actual knowledge of people. And for a lot of situation in risk management, we don't have the data at first. So you need to start with some knowledge, and based on which distribution you're trying to figure out, you're going to go with the gamma distribution, or you're going to go with the beta distribution that's going to give you uncertainty on your initial estimate. Well, I hope most of you are still there. I had fun. Hopefully you did that as well. So quick few last points is model validation. I always have someone checking your model. I have my share of embarrassing mistakes. Most of them I find myself because I've got kind of 2 or 3 personalities in my head, so I can kind of cross-validate myself. But joking aside, have someone check your model. You're so deep in your model, sometimes you don't see the mistakes anymore. Also, you don't need to be a full statistician to be running Monte Carlo simulation. I really love the point that Sam Savage made that he's basically you can be a distribution user. You're not creating the distribution, you're just picking up the parameter that someone who's the keeper of that distribution for your organization, let's say foreign exchange rate or number of incidents, that person feeds you the distribution, and that person is responsible for updating it and making sure it still makes sense, but you're just the user and you put it in your model. So that's something you can do, and try to befriend statisticians as well. But unfortunately, statisticians, maybe they're not the fastest runner, so they might disappear quickly in the zombie apocalypse. So either you find a survival-based statistician, or maybe you just brush up on some of those concepts yourself. Another thing is be mindful of the importance of risk mentors. So far in the presentation, I've thanked 3 risk mentors and or chief risk officer that were instrumental in helping me develop as a risk manager. Thanks Amélie, Scott, and Jean-François. But I also have passive mentor like Alex Sidorenko, Doug Hubbard, who by their books article post videos. They are trying to coach people and make them better risk manager. That they change my perspective on risk. So if you're a risk manager, learn from mentors and try to be a mentor yourself and coach people around you. And we all going to advance better as a discipline. So overall, thanks for attending. You've seen that there's a plethora of tools and techniques that can help you become a more useful risk manager. And thanks for attending. I hope you learned a thing or two. As always, I'm always eager to connect. So if you want to connect on LinkedIn, bounce ideas, please feel free, and have a nice day.